Imagine a civilization so advanced that they've conquered the stars, bent physics to their will, and decoded the very fabric of consciousness itself. Now imagine the moment that same civilization discovered something that absolutely terrified them. A species they couldn't understand, couldn't predict, and couldn't control. That species was us. And the moment of reckoning, it began on a Tuesday, or at least, that's what the humans called it. Dr. Vexil stood before the scanning pod with 8 of his 12 eyes fixed on the human inside. The creature was unconscious, strapped down with harmonic restraints that hummed with enough power to immobilize a Kron battle beast. Around him, the laboratory of Observation Station Gamma-7 thrummed with the collective nervous energy of 300 research scientists from 5 different star systems. They'd been studying humans for exactly 47 solar cycles now, and in that time they'd learned exactly nothing that made sense. Initiating the comprehensive neural mapping, called out Technician Krell from the control station. Her voice carried the usual professional tone, though Vexil could detect the tremor beneath it. Fear. All of them were afraid, though none would admit it out loud. The mind scanner was the crown jewel of their technological arsenal. It had mapped the consciousness of 17 different intelligent species. The Holden Collective, brilliant mathematicians whose minds moved in perfect geometric patterns. The Sorath Warriors, whose thoughts moved like lightning through crystal networks. The Eternal Keepers, whose consciousness existed partially outside normal space-time. Every single species had revealed their inner workings like an open book written in the language of pure logic. The humans' neural patterns. Total chaos. Beginning full-spectrum analysis. Krell announced, and the pod began to glow with soft violet light. Data streamed across every monitor in the facility, translating thought patterns into visual representations. Vexil watched, his secondary eyes scrolling through the incoming information, his tertiary eyes fixed on the human's sleeping face. The readings made no sense whatsoever, which ironically had become completely predictable. "There," said Dr. Morvan, Vexil's research partner, pointing with one of his 4 arms at a particularly chaotic cluster of neural activity. "Look at the pattern disruption. It's like watching stars explode randomly rather than following orbital mechanics." "Fascinating," muttered Vexil, though his tone suggested he'd rather be anywhere else. "We have collected approximately 8,000 terabytes of neural data from this specimen, and each mapping session has produced completely incompatible results. Is it malfunctioning? Is the human brain simply broken?" "No," came a voice from the far corner of the laboratory. Everyone turned to look at Sentinel Prime Thos, the military liaison who'd been observing the experiments from his position by the observation window. He was a Krell, standing nearly 3 meters tall, his exoskeleton gleaming under the laboratory lights like polished obsidian. "The human is functioning perfectly. That is precisely what frightens me." Vexil's eyes narrowed, all 12 of them focusing on the Sentinel. "Explain." "The consciousness is not broken," they said, his voice dropping to a rumble that seemed to vibrate through the floor itself. "The consciousness is free. Every species we have encountered has a structure to their thought patterns, a framework, a cage if you will, built from their evolutionary necessities and their genetic programming. This creature has none of that." The silence that followed was the kind of silence that comes right before something terrible happens. Vexil felt the temperature in the room shift as the air recyclers kicked into a higher gear. Someone's respiratory system began producing a slightly elevated breathing pattern. He suspected it was his own. "That is speculative nonsense," declared Dr. Morvan, but his voice lacked conviction. "We have not finished our analysis, perhaps with more data." "More data will only confirm what we are beginning to understand," interrupted Thos. "These creatures do not think in patterns we recognize. They do not organize their consciousness in any logical framework. They are unpredictable. They are random. They are dangerous. They are bipedal primates from a planet with a single moon," Krell said, and Vexil detected something almost like humor in her voice. Defensive humor. The kind creatures developed when facing something they didn't want to acknowledge. "Surely they cannot be dangerous to us." The human stirred. It wasn't dramatic, just a slight shift of weight, a twitch of muscle fiber, a soft exhalation of carbon dioxide from the mouth orifice. But every sensor in the laboratory reacted as if an alarm had been triggered. The scanning pod shut down automatically. Harmonic restraints brightened to maximum intensity. The human's eyes, which were a clear shade of blue with a small dark pupil in the center, snapped open and fixed directly on Vexil. "Hey," the human said, its vocalization surprisingly clear despite the alien physiology. "Has anyone ever told you that you have too many eyes?" The human was smiling. It was a stretching of the facial muscles that revealed its teeth. A threat display, according to every xenobiology text that had ever been written. Except it didn't feel like a threat. Somehow impossibly it felt like friendliness. "Sedate it," commanded Thos, moving toward the emergency protocols panel. "Wait," said Vexil, raising one hand. His curiosity had overwhelmed his fear for a moment, and he knew even as the thought formed, that this was probably not a good idea. "What is your designation, human? What do you call yourself?" The human's smile widened, which shouldn't have been possible, but apparently it was. "The name's Thorne, and before you lot run more tests, I've got a question for you, Doc. All those machines out there measuring my brain, reading my thoughts, trying to figure out what makes me tick." Thorne paused, taking a breath. The harmonic restraints glowed brighter as the human's heart rate increased. "You found what you were looking for, right? You found that I'm empty up here. No real structure, just random chaos." "The data is inconclusive," began Dr. Morvin. "The data is terrifying you," Thorne corrected, "and somehow, despite being restrained in an alien laboratory on a space station orbiting a planet that didn't even have a proper name." The human looked completely at ease. "You've met intelligent life before. Lots of it. Everything you've met thinks in a way that makes sense to you. Everything follows patterns. Everything can be predicted. Everything can be controlled." Vexil felt his secondary hearts accelerating in their dual chambers. The human continued speaking. "But we don't work that way. We're not broken. We're not damaged. We're just different. And that difference, that beautiful, terrifying, completely illogical difference, is what you're actually afraid of. So here's my real question, and I want you to think about this carefully, because this is important." Thorne's blue eyes locked directly onto Vexil's primary set of eyes. "If you've mapped my consciousness, if you've proven that I'm empty and illogical and impossible to predict, then why are you so afraid of me?" The laboratory fell into silence again. This time, however, it was the silence of revelation. Vexil felt something shifting in his understanding, something fundamental rearranging itself like stellar plates during planetary reformation. Dr. Morven spoke first, her voice barely above a whisper. "Because an empty mind cannot be controlled. Because an empty mind cannot be broken," continued Krell, understanding blooming across her features like bioluminescent flowers opening to a new sun. Sentinel Prime Thorse did not speak. He simply turned away from the observation window and walked toward the door. In his wake, Vexil detected something he'd never expected to find in a being of the Krell species: absolute, unfiltered terror. The human named Thorne laughed. It was a strange sound, rolling and unpredictable and completely free. "See?" the human said. "That's the thing about having an empty mind, Doc. There's no fear we're born with. No instincts that guarantee we'll choose safety. No programming that makes us prefer survival. We could do literally anything, at any moment, for reasons that don't have to make logical sense. And nobody, not even us, knows what we'll choose until we choose it." Vexil stood absolutely still, all 12 eyes fixed on the human. This, he realized, was how civilizations ended, not in sudden explosions of violence, but in the moment they realized they'd been playing chess against an opponent who didn't understand the rules of chess and might at any given moment decide to eat the board instead. The mind scanner's cooling systems kicked into overdrive, and outside the laboratory, something that might have been an alarm or might have been something else entirely began to sound. The alarm that wasn't quite an alarm continued its unsettling wail through the corridors of Observation Station Gamma 7, and somewhere in the depths of the facility, something that had been peaceful just moments before was quickly transforming into something approaching panic. Meanwhile, in the laboratory, Dr. Vexil made a decision that would either save or doom his entire civilization. He decided to ask the most dangerous question anyone had ever asked. What do you want? Thorne's smile shifted. It became something slightly different, something with more edges to it, like watching a predator decide whether prey was worth the effort. Vexil's entire neural system registered this as a warning sign, but he remained motionless, all 12 eyes tracking the human's response with laser precision. That's the interesting question, isn't it? Thorne said, his voice taking on a thoughtful quality that somehow made the situation more threatening rather than less. You're asking me what I want, not what my species wants. Not what humanity wants. But specifically, personally, what does Thorne want? Because you've finally figured out that you can't predict the answer. Correct? Said Vexil carefully. We cannot predict it. That is precisely why I am asking. Perhaps if you tell me, we can avoid a confrontation that none of us are prepared for. From across the laboratory, Dr. Morven made a sound that might have been agreement or might have been despair. Collida moved to stand beside the scanning pod, her three-fingered hands hovering near the restraint controls. She was deciding, Vexil realized, whether to release the human or increase the harmonic frequency until neural cessation occurred. That decision too would depend on what Thorne said next. I want to know why, Thorne said, and somehow that simple statement contained more complexity than the entire data stream that the mind scanner had produced. I've been here for 47 of your solar cycles, 47 days of being poked, prodded, scanned, and analyzed. And in all that time, nobody has bothered to actually ask me questions. Real questions, not the ones where you already know the answer and you're just testing whether I'll lie to you. We assumed direct communication would compromise the research parameters, explained Dr. Morven, her voice defensive. Of course you did, Thorne said. And now there was something close to sadness in the human's tone. Because creatures that think in patterns don't understand creatures that don't. You've been trying to map my consciousness like I'm a star chart, assuming that if you just get enough data points, the picture will become clear. But consciousness doesn't work that way for us. We're not the sum of our patterns, we're the sum of our choices. Vexil felt something shifting in his understanding again, a recalibration of his entire worldview. He had spent 63 of his own years in the scientific community, and in all that time he had never encountered a concept that challenged his fundamental assumptions about how intelligence worked. Yet here it was, presented by a bipedal primate with insufficient neural development according to every standard measurement, and somehow it made a terrible sort of sense. Your species values something we do not, Vexil said slowly, working through the logic as he spoke. You value freedom, specifically, the freedom to make unpredictable choices. Now you're getting it, Thorne said, and the human's smile returned. Look, I'm going to be honest with you, Doc. I don't actually know why my people are here. I was a pilot, transport vessel, civilian route. Nothing special. And then something happened during a jump through your space. Something that knocked out our navigation systems, and we ended up in your territory. You captured our ship. You brought me here, and instead of asking me anything useful, you've spent 7 weeks trying to figure out why my brain doesn't work the way you think it should. What happened to the rest of your crew? Asked Krell, and Vexil detected the real fear beneath the question. She was wondering if this was a military operation. If this was the prelude to an invasion, if the human was a scout for something worse. They're fine, Thorne said. Probably being studied in similar facilities, probably being asked the same questions I'm being asked, probably also wondering why nobody's bothered to explain what's happening, or what comes next. The laboratory fell into a different kind of silence. This one was filled with recognition of the most uncomfortable sort. Because Vexil suddenly understood what Thorne was pointing at. Their entire approach to the human species was based on the assumption that they were objects to be studied, not subjects with agency. They were conducting research on the humans as if the humans were somehow less than intelligent, less than aware, less than deserving of the basic courtesy of explanation. It was, Vexil realized, exactly the kind of treatment that had destroyed civilizations before. I want to propose an alternative, Vexil said, and he was aware that he was probably overstepping his authority, that Sentinel Prime Thus would likely have him removed from the project, possibly removed from existence if he wasn't careful. Instead of continuing to study you as a research specimen, what if we attempted communication? Real communication. Not interrogation, but actual exchange of information. Now why would you do that? Thorne asked, genuinely curious. You're afraid of me. You're afraid of my entire species. I can see it in the way your eyes are moving, in the way your secondary hearts are accelerating, in the way every single scientist in this room is about 1 second away from panicking. You could easily keep me sedated until you figured out how to destroy me. Yes, agreed Vexil, we could. And that is precisely why we must not. He moved toward the scanning pod, slowly, making sure that every movement was deliberate and non-threatening. Dr. Morvin made a sound of protest, but she did not attempt to stop him. Kraylet watched with all three of her eyes fixed on Vexil's position, her hand still hovering near the restraint controls. If we destroy you, or your people, because we fear what we do not understand, we become something that we do not wish to become, Vexil continued. We become predators who kill out of ignorance. That is not who the Vex Collective claims to be. So instead, I propose this. We release you from the restraints. We provide you access to communication systems. We allow you contact your crew, and we listen. We actually listen to what you have to say. This is insanity, Dr. Morven said flatly. This is survival, corrected Vexil. Dr. Morven, you yourself noted that the human's neural patterns are incompatible with our predictive models. This means that any attempt to control the human through standard means will fail. We will either communicate with this species on their terms, or we will face consequences that our models cannot predict. I prefer the former. Thorne tilted his head, studying Vexil with an intensity that suggested the human was running calculations of his own. You're actually going to do it, Thorne said. You're actually going to let me go? Not entirely, said Vexil. We will maintain the station's security protocols. We will ensure that you cannot threaten the vessel or the crew. But within those parameters, yes, you will have freedom of movement and access to communication. Is this acceptable? For a moment, Thorne did not respond. The human's facial expression shifted through several different configurations, cycling through emotions that Vexil's empathy subroutines could only partially translate. Finally, Thorne nodded. Acceptable, the human said. But I've got one condition. Name it, said Vexil. I want to know your name, your real name, not your title or your designation, your actual name. Because if we're going to figure out how to keep my species from destroying yours, or vice versa, we should probably do it between actual people, not between researcher and specimen. Vexil felt all 12 of his eyes focusing on the human simultaneously. It was a strange sensation, this moment of mutual recognition between two completely different forms of consciousness. In the data streaming across the monitors, in the neural patterns of both species translated into visible form, something unprecedented was occurring. Two intelligences meeting not to compete or control, but to understand. My name, said Vexil slowly, is Vexil, and I believe we are about to begin the most dangerous conversation in the history of both our peoples. The harmonic restraints powered down with a sound like 1,000 bells releasing their tone at once. Thorne's wrists came free. The human stood up, stretching muscles that had been confined for 47 solar cycles, and the movement was somehow both ordinary and absolutely terrifying. Then let's make it count, Thorne said. Because my people didn't come to your territory by accident, Vexil, and I think you're smart enough to have already figured that out. The laboratory fell silent. The alarm that wasn't quite an alarm continued its wail outside, and somewhere in the depths of Observation Station Gamma 7, Sentinel Prime Thus was making urgent communications to Military Command, warning them of a situation that standard protocols were completely unequipped to handle. But in the laboratory, Dr. Vexil and the human named Thorne stood facing each other across the empty scanning pod. And for the first time in either of their lives, they were both having exactly the same thought. Everything was about to change, and neither of them could predict how.